Hope you had a chance to stretch your legs. Great to see all the conversations happening here in this room. Appreciate all the participation we're getting from the audience that's with us virtually and all the good questions that have come in throughout the sessions thus far today. We're excited now to turn our attention to the spending side of the equation. And please introduce a superb panel of experts from some of our peer states here in Illinois to provide insights on how states structure their budgeting processes and develop effective investment strategies to improve service delivery, equity, and long-term outcomes. Our panel includes Shelby Kerns, who's the Executive Director of the National Association of State Budget Officers, a professional organization for state budget officers across the United States and its territories. Since joining NASBO in 2020, she's overseen its research, reports, and training on state fiscal conditions. Previously, Shelby was the Deputy Director of the Idaho Department of Labor and served a decade in the Idaho Division of Financial Management as Budget Bureau Chief. She's also previously held leadership roles in several Idaho trade associations and the Idaho Rural Partnership. Along with Shelby, we're pleased to have with us Sophia DiCaro, who is the Executive Director of the Utah's Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, and she's a senior advisor to Governor Spencer J. Cox. Previously, she served as Chief Compliance Officer at the Schinnesser Group and held leadership roles in the Governor's Office of Economic Development and the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, where she began her public service career. A former Utah state representative, DiCaro has taught public budgeting at the University of Utah and serves on numerous boards, including as chair of the Primary Children's Hospital Board of Trustees. Along with Shelby and Sophia, we have Kim Murnieks, who served as director of the Ohio Office of Budget and Management and chief financial officer for the state of Ohio since 2019. There she oversees agency budgets, fiscal policy, and state financial transactions under Governor Mike DeWine. She previously was chief operating officer at the Ohio Attorney General's office, where she modernized IT systems and launched several improvement process initiatives. Earlier in her career, she held senior roles at the Ohio Department of Education and began her career as a budget analyst at OBM. And we are, last but not least, pleased to have with us today Adam Slade to moderate this conversation. Adam is the Director of State Fiscal Policy and Governance at the Illinois Black Advocacy Initiative. He has over 15 years of experience working for public, private, and nonprofit organizations. He's also worked with and for government organizations to connect resident needs to public decision-making to achieve equitable outcomes. He previously served as the Deputy Budget Director of Community Safety for the City of Chicago. So please join me in welcoming Shelby, Sophia, Kimberly, and Adam.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Stephen. I'd also like to thank the Chicago Federal Reserve as well as the Civic Federation for this great event. And I want to thank the first panel for setting the bar really high and for figuring out all the ways that we can address our revenue shortfalls. We don't need to do anything else. I appreciate it. I also do want to apologize to our panel. I did not coordinate our outfits very well. I wished I had done green or pink. So I will try to make up for it in the questions that I asked today. I do want to elevate something that Kim said. When we think about tax and finance for local government and for states, we often don't think about service quality and the impact of public service on our communities. And while as administrators we think about efficiency, we also need to think about effectiveness and what value we are bringing as public servants to our communities. And I think we have a great panel to help us discuss those impacts in particular. So for our first question, I would just like to ask our panelists, and I'll start with our budget directors here, what is the state of your states? What are some of the challenges and wins and successes that you've seen thus far in your role? And just give us a little bit of your state context so we can compare it to our Illinois context.
You want me to start? Okay. Well, Ohio is doing quite well. We have had a very strategic focus on diversifying our economy for about the last almost 20 years. And at the same time, we have also focused on our tax structure and our spending structure so that we can ensure that Ohio has a very strong business climate and that we can recruit more people to come live in Ohio. Reflecting on one of the charts that Elizabeth showed during her presentation this morning, population growth is also a a key issue for Ohio. And so when we think about our state's long-term economic trajectory and the long-term budget trajectory, we focus on our population. And Ohio has an aging population. We've also been a slow growth state from a population perspective. But as we focus on economic diversity, we have also focused policy positions that focus on our kids, focus on retaining students at the collegiate level, because we know that if students build relationships in Ohio while they're in college, that they're more likely to stay. And we're starting to see results, because we see that the emerging population cohort, that kind of 24 to mid 40s population group, we're actually outpacing some of the national data there. And really that this is kind of for the first time ever that Ohio has seen that kind of growth and kind of key population demographics. And that is, we think, largely due to our sustained pro-growth policies and a focus on education and retaining who we have, because we need in-migration into the state, but we also need to focus on retaining our current Ohioans. So we also do look a lot about the amenities that we provide, kind of going back to one of the other conversations earlier. I think that Ohio, we're starting to do a better job of focusing on, we're not just an agricultural state that also, has a Rust Belt manufacturing. In fact, we're neither of those things anymore. We have sustained growth in advanced manufacturing. We have actually grown data centers. We have become kind of we call it the Silicon Heartland. I know there's talk earlier about Silicon everything. Well, we're the Silicon Heartland in Ohio. And again, that's part of the focus that we've had as a state. So we also measure the results. We are very strategic and very focused on transparency. So all of our state's spending and frankly our revenues too are posted online. You can look up the latest transactions every single day, and you can see 10 years of history on our Ohio checkbook website. It's basically you can drill, you can start at the largest view and drill down to the individual transaction level. So we think that good transparency also leads to good policy decisions. And we have a strong data infrastructure, and we also publicly publish a lot of data sets from our agencies on our data.ohio.gov website. So overall, we have been moving in a positive direction, really focused on taking some of the challenges of the past, transitioning them into opportunities, and focusing on our people.
And I'll just chime in on Utah. So the picture of Utah, we are the youngest state in the nation. We are very well diversified in terms of our economy. So we've been blessed that way. We are heavily focused on strengthening families. That's a big theme that you'll hear about and have heard about for quite some time. We have been regularly recognized as a strong state as it relates to fiscal management and business, strong state for business. That has been by design and continues to be a focus of our leadership in Utah. We've got about 3.5 million people in the state of Utah. We used to be viewed as a smaller state, but now we're kind of growing up. I think we're 34th in terms of rankings. And so we're starting to grow up as a state. We do see ourselves as a place where there is a lot of upward mobility for young folks, and we try to capitalize on that. all of that being said, we are also very much focused on all of our risk factors, and we regularly look at our risk and try to mitigate those risks. So one of those, even though we are a young state, we actively want to acknowledge that our fertility rate is decreasing. That's a risk. We also know that that's not unique to Utah. That's also a national phenomena. And what can we learn from states where they have an aging population, knowing that a greater share of our population will be aging? What can we start planning for now to prepare for those demands on our limited resources? So we have, over the last couple of years, tried to make sure we have a good environment for our aging population, but also make sure there's upward mobility for younger folks to come. And do what we can to encourage people to have big families and have an environment where you can. So our tax structure reflects that as well. And we also want to make it a place where employers can come. That being said, we know that it's employment opportunities as well as population growth that is making it so that our housing is very expensive. So we are doing all that we can to try to make it so that it's an affordable place to live in Utah as well. But that gives you kind of a sense of what we look like, where our focus is generally, and I'm sure we'll be able to take a deep dive on that. But really appreciate the opportunity to be here and excited about the discussion today.
What specific approaches or tools do your budget offices use to improve how resources are allocated and tracked? And I know we mentioned the Ohio book a little bit ago, but are there any other tools that you would like to highlight?
Do you want me to jump in? So, in addition to, we have a lot of dashboards where we have that visibility, we track performance, we track, recommendations that we make and where agencies are in meeting those recommendations. So a lot of dashboards. The latest, I guess, tool, we like to see that our state employees are a tool. Our state employees are very much an extension of us and our leadership. So Governor Cox launched a GRIT initiative, which stands for Government Reform, Innovation, and Transparency. And we are really trying to change culture with state government and trying to make it so that everybody owns the responsibility of making sure that anyone who interfaces with state government has the opportunity to make sure you have a great experience. But it's that ownership at the frontline level of everyone trying to improve government. So big push to improve government, and a lot of subset initiatives that roll up to that as well. But we know government, you don't have a choice. When you're working with government, we provide services for a reason. It's because the private sector can't do whatever it is we do. So we want to make sure that those who interface with the state have a great experience. And so we used that initiative as a tool in a lot of what we do as well.
We spent in Ohio about a decade building a very strong data infrastructure so that we could bring together data sets from our various state agencies and better understand, what was happening, what were we seeing as far as service levels, costs, production, so that we could use that data to inform future results. We instituted a results-focused budgeting initiative where we identified what are the biggest priorities for the administration, which budget priorities link into that. And then we required, as part of our budgeting process, that any state agency that wanted to request a new program or initiative or an expansion of a program or initiative, they had to show essentially the theory of how that would produce results, what the expected outputs and outcomes would be, and then we track that quarterly through internal reporting that they share back with our office and with the governor's office. So that is and we focused that very much around the governor's priorities around children, education, impacting our communities, and then we track the wider metrics of the economy, because our theory of budgeting is that if you start with children and families, you then build out to education and workforce initiatives, you then invest in communities through things like law enforcement training and clean water initiatives and addressing brownfields and redeveloping brownfields in our communities, that all of those things together will lead to economic growth. And we're seeing results, and we track those both through our internal results-based budgeting focus, and we report on results in our monthly financial report that my office publishes. It's essentially a monthly memo to the governor on the state of the economy and revenues and expenditures in Ohio, but we publish it, and we have 10,000 plus subscribers to it. So our information and our data, it's on dashboards where people can come get it, but we also do a lot of pushing it out to people and really trying to tell the story of what we're seeing and where we're going and why.
I want to add something that I believe also came from Ohio that's really important. That data collection and those integrated data systems are really key to what they were trying to do. But of course, there's a cost, right? Since we're talking about budgets, let's talk about the money side of it. You have to make the investments up front. And something really key that you all did was finding a way to capture the federal dollars and fighting to be able to use federal dollars to pay their fair share in those data collection systems. And I think that's been really key, because making that investment up front is always, I would say, one of the biggest hurdles, is trying to make the investment, trying to explain that there's going to be such a payoff over time, that this information is really important, but nobody wants to make the big investment in the IT up front. That's always the hard part, I think.
Yeah, that platform building was expensive, but we knew that we had data in all of these silos across state government, and if we could start to bring it together, it would pay off. So yeah, it has been, and we're still on that kind of analytics journey. We're now we kind of have a solid, strong platform and infrastructure. So now the focus is on training our management staff, training our even cabinet directors, so that we can better use the data that we now have at our fingertips to actually make better decisions and more informed decisions.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And on this point, how did states use their ARPA dollars, and how were those tracked for the public to understand where those ARPA dollars went?
Sure. Well, so we wanted to take advantage of all of the things that long-term we've been wanting to do. What can we accelerate? We had some criteria that the legislature followed in deciding how those were distributed. But we built a dashboard on our website, gopb.utah.gov, too, where you can track how it was all allocated, where it's all going. And try to, think about what are the problems we can solve now and accelerate. What's that build up? A lot of what Shelby mentioned, as well as Kim's technology debt that occurred from the previous decade of just super constrained resources, and that building up over time that exacerbated a lot of that, what we call technology debt. So we were able to address a lot of that to help make us stronger and be able to be responsive into the future as well.
I would say Ohio and really, I think most states, we took a lot of the lessons from how federal dollars were used during the Great Recession and kind of post-Great Recession. And we're very focused, laser focused on ensuring that those one-time dollars were spent on one-time investments, so that we did not create fiscal cliffs in the future that we're kind of in right now with the budget that was just adopted. But we used, starting with the CARES Act dollars and then going to ARPA and all of the other various federal bills that contain additional funding that flowed through the states, including additional higher Medicaid match dollars. We were just really strategic, and I think during those years when we were planning those resources, everyone, the governor, all of our legislative leaders, whenever they would see me and we would talk about this, it kind of became a broken record. But my favorite thing was when we were in a budget hearing and the finance committee chairman said one-time dollars for one-time expenses, and I was like, okay, my work here is done. I have penetrated the consciousness of the General Assembly, so that they are even, understanding that we have to be really careful, because it is really easy to try to use those dollars to more kind of plug ongoing holes and become reliant on them. I'm actually, I'm really pleased with how the state of Ohio utilized all of those extra dollars. And we even looked at some of the, what I'll call the above line state dollars, some of the additional sales tax revenues because of that shift from services to goods, where we knew that, we saw elevated sales tax revenues coming in. We knew that would not last. So we even planned some of our state general fund dollars as was one-time dollars. And that was a little trickier to try to explain. But I came up with some charts that kind of showed, the peak and then the normal trajectory line that kind of cut off that peak. And that's when using some data visualizations really came in handy. But we made it through that without creating structural deficits. I'm actually worried about some of our local governments, especially schools and some of our counties and municipalities, where they use some of their ARPA dollars to just fund their ongoing expenses, teacher salaries and law enforcement salaries, all things that were allowable with under the ARPA rules, but that I think we'll start seeing that not just in Ohio, but really I think probably some budget holes across, especially at the local level, including at the school district level. We also created a transparency website so everyone could see how we were spending the dollars easily. And so, yeah, I think we did a good job, but I am still worried about local governments on that front.
I'll second that. We really saw an emphasis at the state level on using those one-time dollars for one-time expenses. Sometimes I think those lessons from the Great Recession are just like tattooed on every budget director's, arms or something. Like, we just can't let that go. It's so ingrained now. But we, local governments hadn't seen the same support that states had seen during the Great Recession. So they're trying. They weren't quite as used to figuring that out. And I think we're seeing that pressure come back on states, particularly with school districts. School districts saw a large influx of funds. They didn't have as many one-time places to spend those funds. So we're seeing some of that pressure come back on states. When we look kind of nationally, we really saw states focus on long-term investments, things like the water, wastewater, and broadband were 3 categories that were allowed specifically, but also in some of the more flexible revenue replacement is what we call it. But it was really used for these one-time investments as well. And so some of that has alleviated what would, normally a local government would probably need to raise property taxes to do some of this infrastructure work. And they've been able to avoid that. So some of those investments, really are going to be paying off over generations. We saw a lot of deferred maintenance be taken care of. If you ever come to a NASBO meeting, you'll never see a group of people so excited to talk about how much deferred maintenance they were able to take care of during that time. But, you have this big backlog of things, whether it's transportation or building maintenance, and you're never really able to even chip away at it. Like you're spending so much money, but you're just kind of staying as much behind as you were before, sort of would kind of be the way it felt. And those dollars allowed states to catch up on some of those things. And then to Kim's point, there was also a lot of, general funds were booming at the same time, a lot of that in the sales tax, but also because states were able to use some of those federal dollars and sort of maybe cover some things that they would have with those. So we had really good, strong general fund surplus, and that allowed states to make make progress on outstanding debt, whether that's in pensions or, just even in capital projects. We saw states, even some states, pay off their debt and start cash flowing those projects, which has really given them a cushion for what they're facing now in borrowing too. We're seeing borrowing be low across the nation, so states are able to look at that as a source now to maybe catch up on some things as things are hitting. So really seeing credit ratings go up for states, including Illinois, at this time, because states were able to make such progress and were really careful. I think sometimes it's under recognized how careful states were. They also had to do performance measures on their spending. They were required to submit a report each year on forward-looking what they hoped to accomplish. And that's probably an easier way to look at where things are going to go in the future, because the spending data is a little bit delayed on the federal side. It's always hard to catch up on that. So, seeing where states were prioritizing those dollars that's where we would look at what they were hoping to do.
And if I could, I know we were talking a lot about the past and what we did do, and I think that it's really important too that we all acknowledge that spending is still happening, and we're still benefiting economically from that spend. And we know that. We know that it's going to be, spent through December of 2026. And so there's still a lot of economic activity occurring because of that spend. And so we're being very cognizant of that as well, and making sure that, as we're thinking about the revenue side, that we're responsibly managing that expenditure side because of that.
I think that's really important too, just to emphasize that point, because with some of these longer term projects that states were doing and locals in infrastructure, a lot of the spending is still occurring. Takes a long time to get those projects off the ground. So those, sort of this last year and a half, you might see a lot more spending from those dollars than you would think. You probably think it's the tail end. In a lot of cases, it's actually going to be quite a lot of spending activity.
Yeah, the one-time revenue for one-time expense that got a big smile from Paula and Joe over there. So one of the comments made was worrying about local governments. And so how do states work with local governments to identify need, and how do states support local governments, and what challenges lie ahead for them?
Sure. So Ohio has a plethora of local governments. And one of the focus areas for Governor DeWine when he was elected was to build a strong relationship with local governments. He started his career as a county prosecutor, and he's very kind of emotionally tied to really every local government in the state. He's had a long career. He knows them, and that was an important priority for him even before the pandemic. And then when the pandemic occurred, we created a local government strike force. So and he and I and really the whole leadership team, we were continually every day, multiple times a day, in communication with our local governments, our city leaders, our county leaders, our villages, and our townships, and our school districts. So we built very early in the administration really strong communication channels with our local governments. And we use those still on an ongoing basis now when we're planning our biennial budget. I talk with our local associations. They come in and meet with me. They meet with our cabinet directors. We know what their priorities are, and then that translates into the governor's budget. And then, of course, they are very much a part of the legislative process as well. But we're very intentional about ensuring that we have good communication with our local partners. When we look at the state's budget, 87% is spent on grants and subsidies to some local partner, whether that's a school district, a hospital through our Medicaid dollars, a college or university, or a county or village or township government. The vast majority of the budget is spent locally. So maintaining those channels of communication, both on the needs assessment side, but also as we're working through the implementation is just very important. And when you boil the state budget down even further, more than 80% is spent through just 10 line items. So K-12 education, higher education, the only one of those line items that's really a state line item is the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction for institutional prison operations. We have a local government fund where we share revenue with local governments, and then we have property tax reimbursements where we pick up about $2 billion of the local property tax tab. So if you look at just those, and Medicaid, I don't think I mentioned Medicaid. So if you just look at those 10 line items, that's more than 80% of the budget, and it's basically all local spending.
In Utah, Governor Cox established a few senior advisor positions. We, in addition to having a very active League of Cities and Towns Association, we engage in several ways. For example, we have a senior advisor on long-range planning. We have a senior advisor on rural affairs. We have one on housing, local government, homelessness, and even the Great Salt Lake, advising on these policy issues. But they all engage with local government officials in that way. But in addition to that, because we have a planning function in the budget office, we actually do some co-trainings with the league as well, so that we have some cross collaboration going on with our office in terms of, managing the ARPA money, but also in terms of opportunities we have in economic development and things like that. We very much cross collaborate on a local, regional, and state level.
Second point, what Sophia said about the associations, local governments have really strong associations, and they don't hesitate to break down the governor's door or the doors of Congress. As I've noticed now that I'm in DC, they're always there, and there's a lot of them, right? So they outnumber the governors, so they're everywhere. They're a very strong lobby, and but one of the things I think that we're seeing right now is because of the pressures on state budgets, or sometimes it just feels like a pressure. Like I didn't think I would come to NASWA and talk all the time about feelings, but I talk about feelings almost all the time because things, the absence of those federal dollars, even before we saw some of the cost shifts that we're looking at from the federal level, it felt really tight. And it was kind of funny to look at how much, revenues have grown and how much is, they're still there, but it feels tight just because those buckets are gone, right? And dwindling. So things start to feel a little tight. And some of the priorities we've seen from governors are around addressing affordability and particularly housing affordability. And of course, property tax is a big part of that. There's not always enough replacement when there's been property tax reform. We're seeing schools, again, already feel like things are tight because their federal dollars have gone away. And so they're maybe already in a cutting mode. So things start to feel tight. And I think at the local government level, we're going to start hearing more about, wanting more state dollars, that there's not enough. We see them at the national level already saying, we want a greater share of the transportation dollars, which are already dwindling to states. And some of that, I think, came from they got used to federal money, too. Maybe they weren't getting a lot before, and now they had during the ARPA, being able to get that influx of money. So we're kind of seeing those things of, hospitals, schools, all of those things are going to, on the expenditure side, be really big for local governments as well. And they're going to be trying to come to the states at the same time that states might be trying to pass, they've had costs shifted onto them, but they might be trying to shift it down to locals. So you can listen and have great feedback in all of these ways to talk, but it doesn't necessarily create more money. So I think the friction's probably going to get amped up no matter how much communication there is.
And speaking of friction, I'm getting a few questions on the iPad here about the elephant in the room. How are states going to respond to cuts to Medicaid and SNAP?
No one wants to go first. I'll point out a couple things first.
Okay.
We've been doing what I call cocktail napkin math because the way all of this is structured, it's very difficult to say, it's not just a percentage change to state. So it's really hard. And we've looked at some analysis from KFF that did kind of a state by state analysis and just tried to figure it out, kind of what it would be. And when we look at, so if we, you know, and it's going to phase in, right? So to phase in over 10 years, but if you just took an equal, you know, assumed that was equal each year and looked at it that way, it roughly comes out to being the same amount of general fund dollars that states spend on higher education. So if you think about, and that's SNAP and Medicaid together, not any of the other costs that are being shifted, you know, not the expenditure growth that we were already seeing, which was already outpacing revenues in most states. So that's, you know, if you think about creating another higher education system, that's kind of ballpark what states are looking at over that period. How states are going to respond is going to vary. There's, you know, they can cut programs, they can cut in other areas, or they can raise revenue, or they can do all three or mixtures. And I think that's probably what it'll take in some states. We'll see things be different. But one thing that I think is really key to remember is, too, that the phase-in doesn't start right away. And when we look at what's going to happen between now and then, we'll have a minimum of 19 new governors, just talking about whether they're term limited or whether they've chosen not to run. So that's the minimum of new governors we'll have before these start to phase in. So when people ask me how states are going to respond, I don't even know who's going to be I don't know who's going to be in charge of that. You know, we'll see that with state legislators as well, that a common conversation that the three of us have is, you know, turnover in legislatures, right? We have elected officials who've only known kind of the boom dollars. And just to illustrate that, I've been asked to speak to a lot of those local government groups, you know, whether it's even groups for governors, legislatures, local government, and they all ask the same question, like when pre-January, they were asking me the same question, when's our next big bucket of money coming? Like it's not happening, which I think is sunk in now, but they were used to that. They were just used to it, right? They got infrastructure money, they had COVID dollars, they were very used to it. So, we don't know exactly how states are going to respond, except for that it's probably going to take a mixture of measures to get there.
So in Utah, we just federal funds, generally speaking, is part of, you know, I talked a little bit about risk mitigation. We do a lot of risk mitigation as it relates to federal funds. One of the things we do is contingency planning. So we require, if an agency applies for federal grants, they have to, you know, provide us detail on what will happen if that money goes away, and what will they do, and are they hiring employees with that money. They also have to, you know, answer a variety of questions. So we collect that information, and it gives us a really good sense of, you know, what's going to happen if whatever grant goes away. How will we plan for that? So we have a big emphasis on that contingency planning side. And because of that, we've been able to do things like, you know, create a rainy day fund for Medicaid. We have what's called a Medicaid stabilization fund, where we built in a lot of that risk, and have set aside money in the event, you know, our cost share goes down or is changed. We put a trigger law in place in the event that growth population, you know, our FMAP changes there, where we can, you know, hit the reset button. As it relates to the proposal that actually passed, now that we know and have visibility of what that looks like, we actually think, because Utah has already done some work requirement policies, that we'll be able to weather it. You know, I don't want to downplay it, but because of that more frequent eligibility requirement now, we think that will probably translate to enrollment declines. You know, on the front end, that means that we'll probably have to pay less for Medicaid. You know, you could argue the indirect costs, though, if you have people now not covered, that will come back later to bite you. So, you know, I know there's that as well. But in the immediate term, that's probably going to hit us less. As it relates to SNAP, we actually have a really healthy error rate. And so we are one of those fortunate states where we won't have to cover the benefit side. We'll have to cover a bigger portion of our administrative side. That'll be about 13 million ongoing. We'll be able to absorb that. So I think we're positioned well to handle those areas. It's the tax side that will be hitting us more on the corporate income tax side, and trying to understand to what degree that means, knowing that the bulk of our income taxes go to education. So we're trying to understand that, but we think our economic growth can absorb some of that, not all of it, but because of our practices in setting aside, and planning for that risk, we're feeling okay about how we're going to weather that storm.
As Shelby mentioned, most of the impacts are in future years. Ohio enacted our 2-year biennial budget on June 30th, and then of course the federal changes came on 4 days later. We're still working through what that will look like. We do anticipate some impacts potentially on the cost sharing, administrative cost sharing for SNAP in this biennium. We've started some initial conversations with the General Assembly about what that means and what it looks like. Two things that we included in our budget legislation that are now part of Ohio law that we included specifically because of the federal uncertainty was are a Medicaid expansion trigger. So like about, I think 10 or 12 other states, Ohio now has in our statute that should the federal government decrease their share of Medicaid expansion costs below 90%, then Ohio would begin measures to no longer participate in Medicaid expansion. I actually believe that states having those trigger laws will make it less likely that the federal government will ever take that path, but we'll see. So that's one thing that we did to essentially protect Ohio's general fund. And then the other thing that we did was put in statute clarity around what federal funds are for. Federal funds that we receive at the state level and even those that we pass through to the local level are funds that we receive to run federal programs. So if the federal government makes a change to a federal program, that does not mean that the state automatically can even legally backfill with state dollars. So we put in statute very clear that should the federal government change the funding, the shares, or if they were to pause or otherwise change federal law around federal programs, then that does not automatically implicate the state budget. So that is now part of Ohio Revised Code. Now, we also know that there will be realities, that there will be areas where a future governor or the legislature will want to implement a state level program to make up for something that either goes away or changes at the federal level. But I think that will be part of a future budget discussion where we're term limited. As Shelby mentioned, our governor he's finishing his second term here in the next 17 or so months. So that will most likely fall to the next administration and the next General Assembly, which we also have legislative term limits. So there will be a lot of change there as well. So we look at it as our goal. My goal is to leave the state in the best possible position we can. So we've continued to rebuild our rainy day fund. We've also built up our short-term emergency purposes fund. Every year, Ohio, in addition to having our savings account, the rainy day fund, the budget stabilization fund that takes an act of the General Assembly to access, we also have a short-term contingencies fund. We call it the emergency purposes fund. And that fund can be accessed by a request from the administration to a legislative committee. We call it the controlling board. It's chaired by my office, and then it has 6 legislative members. So 7 members total can release money from this emergency purposes fund. And we use it every single year. We plan for it in every single budget. But one thing that we did during when we had the ARPA funds, the federal U.S. Department of Treasury published a rule that the interest from the state ARPA funds did not have to be credited back to the fund, that states were free to take the interest earnings on the state fiscal emergency funds and allocate them to other purposes. So we allocated that interest to our Controlling Board Emergency Purposes Fund. So it now has a very robust balance, the largest balance it's ever had in history. So between that and for short-term issues, and then the budget stabilization fund for long-term issues, we are leaving the state in a very strong financial position to hopefully weather any of these uncertainties that come about because of federal decisions.
And following up on, Sophia talked a little bit about there's going to be some savings probably up front from the things that happen. And then there's a range. So the impacts are going to range so much. If you're, a non-expansion state for Medicaid, you're not getting hit as hard with some of these shifts. So our range, kind of in our cocktail math that I told you, kind of goes from less than 2% of general fund up to over 20%. So if you have some savings up front, and then the cost shifts aren't as much, you might be able to even absorb those with growth. So you're going to see this really vary widely among states. But you will, that said, and that how that, we kind of talk about that being off for a while, you will see things start to hit states. You're starting to hear states implement cuts now, and that's preparing because they're getting hit current year income tax states are with tax conformity.
Yes, thank you for that. One more hard question that has been elevated by our group here. Illinois is facing pension crisis right now with unpaid pension liabilities. What advice do you have for Illinois as we pursue balancing our pension obligations?
Well, one thing I would say is I think it's important to acknowledge the work that Illinois has already done, and that kind of during COVID with surplus dollars really prioritize that. We see that come through, and in credit ratings, right? We see that that's been a focus, that there's been already a lot of attention paid to that, and I think it's just not it's not taking your eye off of it. Remembering it's there. That's a long term. That's going to be it's going to be an issue and an expenditure demand that obviously isn't going away. Watching Elizabeth's slides really illustrated that point to us, and so I think you gotta keep addressing it. And when there's extra surplus money or a little bit of give, those are good places to prioritize. I think all states look at that. Where do we put our any unanticipated revenue, or where do we prioritize when we can, and it's got to take care of your long-term obligations.
These are tough issues. They're tough politically. One of the things we do, knowing, again, governors serve for, a short period of time, lawmakers turn over really frequently. How do you build a budget, when you're building in short-term windows? How do you think about your long range issues, your long-term issues? One of the things we've done to try to ensure that we're thinking about the long game is instill strategic planning. So in the budget office, we have a whole team that focuses on strategic plans. Every agency is required to have a strategic plan so that we have a 5 to 10 year window that's actively refreshed. So that, when they're asking for money, well, is it in your strategic plan? If it's not, then it must not be that important for your strategic direction. But we have a very intense focus on strategic planning, even for our transportation gaps. We have a unified transportation plan where all the stakeholders get together. We know what the costs are going to be long term. And then as we, have opportunity to rank those and decide what will be funded, you kind of remove the politics from it a little bit. And so the advice I would have is to put a long-term strategic plan to get out of that hole, because that's not something that's going to occur in the short term. That's going to take years and years and years to work at. But you can do it, and you can remove the politics of it if you put a process in place that, leans on process and put a strategic goal where you have a lot of buy-in from stakeholders. And it's almost impossible politically if you're thinking in the short term. But if you lean on that strategic plan, you'll have to chip away at that over the next foreseeable future to get where you need to go. But that's where I'd start.
I would just echo what Shelby said about keeping your eye on the ball. There has been good progress made, and Sophia's points about long-term thinking. That's the most important thing when you're looking at these kinds of risks is just transparency, keeping focused, and don't take any actions that would make it worse. So that would be my advice.
We also see, we saw states do this with their savings too, is make it automatic, because that way you're not, it's not a decision that you have to rely on every year. If it just sort of automatically happens, especially in tight times, people want services, they want to, prioritize dollars that way. So whenever you can make payments and do things on an automatic basis, it sort of removes it from the politics.
Yeah, we've got a couple of examples where we've done that, even for our capital, our state, not Capitol building, but state Capitol buildings in general, our buildings, we, set aside in statute 1.5% of our value of our replacement value of our capital automatically goes in from the budget, right from the top. Any type of revenue we experience will go into that. We also have a practice of setting aside ongoing money and use it for one-time things like capital. So our higher ed buildings, we have a robust ongoing mechanism where funding automatically goes to that to fund over time. It's spent on one-time things. That enables us to use that as a buffer as well and gives us flexibility. If we have economic downturns, we can absorb those ebbs and flows with our ongoing revenue in those buckets as a backup plan. So we do that with our education as well, knowing that education is the biggest part of our budget. We set aside ongoing money, spend it one time, and that enables us to use that as an expense buffer as well.
And one final question, how can states best educate taxpayers on the value of services received for taxes paid?
Oh, I think it goes back to the dashboards and just talking about all the time, this is where your money's gone, this is what you got for it. I think about this as a taxpayer too. I try not to admit this very often, but I'll admit it here. The one and only time I ever wrote to my state legislature, to my legislators, was to tell them not to establish a rainy day fund, because I felt like that money, shouldn't be saving my money. You're taxing me too much. And it really came back to haunt me. If you think that your elected officials don't know who wrote to them or keep those letters, they do. That was great. But educating on why are you doing it? What are the long-term benefits? What are your children going to see from this? Maybe this is something you're not going to experience today, but we've prioritized this so we can continue providing these services for your children, for your grandchildren. It's all about the kids. You just have to say that over and over. I think that's yeah.
So in Utah, we have, as part of our GRIT initiative, we have a customer experience program where every single agency had to take on a project that they could focus on, where we can collect feedback from the users, from the customer. So if you go to a DMV, if you go to, a liquor store, anywhere where you're getting charged for a service, there'll be a QR code at the bottom. You can leave your feedback, and then the agencies take that feedback and look to improve their services. So it's a way that we try to give you what you're paying for, and we try to make sure that the end user has a good experience when interfacing with the services we provide. So that's been a great program, and a way where people can get real time, give feedback real time, but also be part of improving government.
I think transparency is critical. Dashboards, all of the data that you can provide. But we also have used social media. When I came in 6.5 years ago, the state budget office had 0 social media presence. So we changed that. We push information out. We have called our Dollars in Data series. Every Wednesday we publish a little data tidbit about either a state agency spending priority or a new program or a grant application that is open right now to receive applications. So just using all of the opportunities to provide as much information as we can in a consumable way, because we know that state budgets are really complicated. We also know that for the average citizen, it's just government. They don't really recognize or need to know the difference between all of our different state agencies or local government versus state government. And we have a lot of different governments in Ohio, as I kind of talked about earlier. So just providing information that's consumable, that's important to them in ways that they can see that it's visible on things like social media.
Well, I would like to thank the panel for these great insights in your states and things that anyone else can consider. And I think a future panel we should do is on governance challenges as we work with state and local governments to address our issues. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shelby. Adam, thank you very much. I know that for a lot of people in the room, and I'm going off script again, I know. For a lot of people in the room, what we were hearing is foresight, principle, put into practice, and if only we were there. But one of my takeaways in this moment is in our hyper-reactive, challenged place here, that if we do not think from principles, put them into practice with the foresight that you have all spoken to, with long-term planning, then we will have missed utilizing the crisis that we are in. And we're really grateful for you to sort of share all of that with us. And it's always great to hear from others to take us out of the headspace of the burden of the narrative of the challenge. So thank you. And we'll now take a break for lunch. And as you enjoy your meal, we'll turn to a keynote conversation on how to rebuild trust in government, which you have set us up very nicely for, an issue that underpins absolutely everything we have discussed so far. Thank you.
Thank you.